tell me about the arts in your lives growing up. Why are the arts important?
Well, I started, of course, girls take piano. Then I was in the band, and so we played a lot of classical music, a lot of classical pieces. And so my background was just growing up in a high school, in Oklahoma, and then knowing the composers and enjoying the music. Ross is a little different. He didn't play an instrument.
No, I can't read music, okay? My first influence in musical was real simple. We were guests of a pretty good New York Yankee baseball player. In 1957, the Yankees were playing the Milwaukee Braves in the World Series. And this guy, that we were his guest, it was very intriguing. We went to New York, and as his guest, and when we got there after the games, and he said, "What do you want to do?" I said, "Well, our dad said we love to go to Broadway play. Never been to one, So we went to see My Fair Lady, and from the overture on, I had nothing but chills. And so while I was there in New York, I fell in love with Broadway, and I fell in love with music, and I was the guest of Oklahoma Mickey Mantle. That's when I fell in love with music.
And you all had this idea to do a $25 million matching endowment for programming. Why was it important to specifically bring in programming, these world-class acts, to Stillwater?
Well, if you have a building, you have to put something in it. And if you put all your money in the building, then you don't have anything left over to bring the first-class, performances that you want. And so we were involved in Bravo Vale, which a musical in the summertime, and we learned what was important was the performances. And so we knew, after we got Burns on board, we knew that the performances is what we wanted to endow.
And what are you most looking forward to?
Oh, the variety, all of it. I like all of it, and that it's going to be a very varied and diverse acts and different performances.
And with that, we're starting with the New York Philharmonic. I know you were a big part of getting them here. And you actually serve on the board of directors for the New York Phil. How did that connection come about?
Classic to me, was Conway Twitty and George Jones. So classical music was that. And so when I went at Helen Hodges, another one of our patrons, when Billie and I went at Helen's invitation to see the New York Philharmonic, it was 5 years ago, there in Bravo, in Vale, and we were her guest. I got chills up my spine when they played the Star Spangled Banner. And you young people get chills up your spine a lot. Us old people, we don't, that doesn't happen too often. And when it does, you would like to replicate it. The McKnight Center, the performances at the McKnight Center all came about because of relationships.
And speaking of relationships, we've been speaking with some of the other patron donors, and every one of them has mentioned that you all were such a big part of why they signed on. What does that mean to have inspired that?
Oh, it's fun. It's just a lot of fun. It's friendships. We get together and have a talk and visit and go back to our history 50 years ago when we were all here at the university, and that makes it a lot of fun.
As the students come in and they're impacted by the McKnight Center, by the legacy you're leaving, what is your message to them? What do you hope they take away from this?
Oh, I hope it just rounds out their education here at Oklahoma State University. They have the academics, we have the athletics, spiritual for growth, and music, which rounds out. Music can change the world because music changes people. And so that's what I hope that makes the impact, that it just rounds out their education.
Very, very well put. I think that's, it's just fantastic. The only other thing I would say is I hope that they pass it on.